introduction. My name is Frank Parker, and I've been with Baba for about 48 years now. First saw him, heard his name in 1970. I was working in a Wall Street firm, and one of the partners there, Don Euchre, had a big picture of Baba in his office, surrounded by pictures of his family. And I went in there one day for some reason, and I asked the fateful question, which many of us have asked, who is that? And that was the beginning. And Don played it down. He didn't say he's God in human form or do anything like that, but I forget exactly what he did. He did it perfectly for me. And over the course of the next several weeks, we were working late. Don would come back to the back office where I was. And I would ask questions. You know, Baba was prompting me. Of course, I didn't know that, but he was prompting me. What is this? Who is this guy? Why is he? What is he? Reincarnation, things like that. And of course, being a Sagittarius, I've always been interested in philosophy and never found anything worthwhile in Western philosophy, too mental for me. At some point, Don said, look, he wrote down the name of the book, Listen Humanity. And he said, if you're interested, go around to Weiss's bookstore, famous bookstore in the village, and get the book. And he, very low key. So I did go to Weiss's bookstore, and I went back to the philosophy section, Eastern philosophy, and I'm looking for the book Listen Humanity. And the first book I see that catches my eye is Paul Brunton's book, Search and Secret India. So I pulled this book off the shelf, and I opened it up. First chapter, I Meet a Master. And it's about Paul Brunton meeting Meherabad. So naturally, I stood there and read the book. Read that part of the book. It was only maybe 6-7 pages. And he did not have a good experience with Baba because Brunton wanted experiences. So I put the book back on the shelf. Now I'm starting to think. This is my first mini test, which I also didn't know was happening. And I eventually did find Don Stevens' book. And I purchased the book, went home. My remembrance, after so many years of life, is that I read it from cover to cover and put the book down and was absolutely convinced no one could say this unless it was God himself. So that was sort of the trigger, the beginning for me. And then, of course, I went back and I talked to Don, and it's full of questions now. And then at that time, Fred and Ella Winterfeld were just getting ready to leave New York. They had been instructed by Baba to move here to Myrtle Beach. And so the Baba lovers at the time who knew about this impending occasion, they rented a house on Barrow Street. And Bruce Hoffman and the Ickowitz twins and Fred and Ella was sort of there guiding them in the background. Because I remember being there in one of the first meetings when Fred and Ella were there. And so I started going to Baba House. And it was down in the village, and I can't remember at that time. I think I was sort of in between situations, as they say, as to where I was living. And I was certainly, you know, doing what we all did back in the 60s and late 60s and 70s. And so I started going to Baba House. I saw people like Margaret Krask and some of the other, I think Darwin came down once, and it was an interesting crew. And in contrast to that, there was another group in New York, which we all know and love, called the Society for Avatar Meher Baba, Dr. Harry Kenmore's group. And for some reason, there was this friction between the two groups, although we never had any interchanges. But they were the prim and proper. They had the suits and the ties. The women had the dresses down below the knees. And of course, the Baba House crowd, the long hair and partly clothed, if they were lucky, and totally irreverent, and would go outside after a Baba meeting and smoke marijuana. You know, there was a big difference between the two. And but they did one time for one of Baba's birthdays, they put on a play, and a bunch of us from Baba House went up to see this play. And all I can remember was, I think one of the opening songs was, "You've got to be Baba's football. You've got to let him kick you around, rah rah rah." And I remember thinking, boy, did I make the right decision? Or did Baba put me in the right place? But it's true, when we were in Assisi, I was talking to Green about this. And he sang the whole song for us. I said something, oh yeah, and he went singing it. This is, Assisi thing was just recently, by the way. Anyway, the next obvious step after the Baba House, and in those days there weren't many books. God Speaks was there, and the discourses were there, the first blue volumes, I believe. So the next step in my Baba evolution was to go to come here to Myrtle Beach. And I forget exactly when I did that, but I remember I took a bus down, and it was my first ever bus trip from New York to Myrtle Beach. I don't know how many hours it was, and there were people on the bus that were throwing devoured chicken bones up the aisle and little bottles of hooch that they had finished. It was one of those trips. And so I get off the bus. I don't remember how I got to the center, but I wound up at the gateway, and I walk in, and there's this good-looking young man sitting there, and I sit down, I introduce myself, and he introduces himself as Marshall Hay. And so we start to talk a little bit. He asks me, where'd you come from, and the usual questions. And then he says, I don't want you to be insulted, but I've got to ask you, are you on drugs? I looked like I was on drugs, because the hair was down to here. I had a guitar slung over my shoulder, and I couldn't play a chord. It was an effect, It sort of went with the image. So anyway, I managed to get past Marshall, and they got me onto the center. I think a call was made to Kitty about this looking guy here. And so somebody has, I forget how it was, they took me to the log cabin. And I walk into the log cabin, and as you know, the log cabin has 2 beds. And I walk in, and on the bed is seated a young man with sort of curly hair, no shirt, in his underpants, and he's putting on false fingernails. So I figured, I knew it. I knew that Baba got me into this. I see where this whole thing is going. It's just a masquerade. And it turns out his name was David Barrison. And David Barrison was putting on false fingernails because he was going to play the guitar that night. But for that first 30 seconds, I was ready to take my guitar and get the heck out of this place. Anyway, this is the amusing thing that Baba does. So the next event of consequence was the next day. I was sitting in the boathouse. Oh no, first I went to the original kitchen, and at that time the extension wasn't there. It was just the original kitchen. And I had gotten some food. I don't know where I got. I guess before I got to the center, I got some food, some milk, and some this and that, some Rice Krispies and stuff. So I go in there, and there's only one table. And so I sit at the table, and there's no one in there. And I get the Rice Krispies and the milk, and in walks this couple, all dressed in white Indian pajamas. Both of them with long blonde hair, both of them with long ponytails. And they had sort of American Indian beaded thing around their waist and hanging off with these different little pouches. So I don't know, I say hello, they say hello, they sit down, they get a couple of plates, I'm there with the Rice Krispies. And they open the pouches, they take the pouches off, and they put a bean here and a pea here and some kind of paste. Macrobiotic? That was the thing back in those days, I think. Me, coming from New York City, hamburgers and pizzas, what did I know about macro? And then they put the stuff away, and very deliberately done, and then they look at each other, they hold hands, and they close their eyes. And I guess they were doing some silent something or other. And I became suddenly aware of snap, crackle, pop, snap, crackle, pop, pop. So much so that I put my hands over my Rice Krispies, because I felt I was destroying this moment of spiritual ecstasy these two are into. So, anyway, after that little incident, I went down. I was sitting in the boathouse all by my lonesome, and there weren't many people on the center in those days, as I remember. And I noticed some little woman running down the steps from the kitchen down to the bridge. And as she got closer, I realized this had to be Kitty from all the descriptions. So she ran right past me, didn't even look at me in the boathouse, but right before she put a foot on the bridge, she noticed that it was a tree limb sort of hanging down from a tree right there on the edge. So she, in typical Kitty fashion, she gets it and she's pulling it. So I get off my lazy backside, go out there, and I help her. And I'm pulling the tree like this with her, and, oh yes, oh thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh no, just put it over there, you know. So then this all happened like in 30 seconds. Then she sort of spun around. She said, "You must be Frank Parker. Come tomorrow at 10." And off she goes. So now I had an appointment with Kitty. And I had come down to the center, and I had this this sort of Mexican Western vest on it I used to wear on my trips with Dr. Timothy's Elixir. And I was very attached and fond of it. And so I'm laying in bed that night and thinking, I need to do something to make this woman like me, because we had heard so much about Kitty up in Baba House. So I go to Kitty's house the next day at the appointed time, and I brought this vest with me. So I walk in and I sit down, and she's talking to me and asking me the usual Kitty questions. And, oh, where are you from? And, oh, how long have you known about Bob? And then she looks, and I'm sitting there, and I had this thing on my lap, and she looks, she says, what's that? And so I got up from my seat, and I walked around and got down on one knee. I said, this is very much associated with my drug-taking days. And I said, it just came to me last night to give this to you. And I handed it to her. And she took it, and this is the part that gets hard. She said, before you leave here, all your questions will be answered. And that was the destroying moment. And she had to take me to her bedroom to calm me down. You know, many have had this experience. It was absolutely Baba, right through her, to me. And so, for the rest of my stay, I was a Kitty-ophile. I really admit, I said, this, you know, so much about her, but then it took me a while to realize that. And Ann Collin happened to be on the center. And I was telling the story to everybody, because it really was a moment. If reading the book was a moment, this was a different kind of moment. And Ann Collin, I was telling the story one day, and she looked at me, she said, you become a lion hunter. I said, a lion hunter? What's a lion hunter? She says, don't you realize that wasn't Kitty Davy that did that? It was Meherabad reaching out and touching you. Anyway, that was another little enlightenment. So, that's the center experience. So the next thing, of course, I went back to New York, and the next thing on the agenda was we make a trip to India. This is the way the things go, you know. Find out about Baba, go to the center, and then go to India. So it so happened in those days that you could go to India for $450 round trip on the Emperor Ashoka 747. Now for someone, a Sagittarian like me who loves to travel, this was a big deal. It would be the first trip out of the country. So I got the ticket. Of course, Don was very helpful in getting me geared up to do this. And I rode ahead to Jal Dastur. And he answered me and said, I'll meet you in Bombay Airport. So I go there, I get on the plane, and indeed it was the Emperor Ashoka, the big 747. And it was the first time I ever saw Indians using the facility, shall we say, when they were standing up on the seat, not sitting down. This was a shock. And by the time we arrived at Bombay, I think it's safe to say the restrooms were not habitable by man or beast. Anyway, it was a good trip, and I got over there. And I didn't get any sleep because I guess I was so wired up with the idea of being in India. I landed in the middle of the night, didn't know where I was, and in the airport, I come out of the plane and they call my name over the loudspeaker. Come to the Air India desk. So I go there. There's a message for me from Jal. It said, Frank, come to Pune. Now, Pune could have been Mars, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. So I had met this guy in the plane. He was also going to see Baba, Sachi Sai Baba. And we sort of hung out together, and we left the airport, and when the first time you walk out of Bombay Airport in 1972, it is a revelation. The sights, the sounds, the smells, people living on the street, it was, whoa. I almost got back on the Upper Ashoka for the return trip. But anyway, we persevered. Somehow we wound up wandering around the streets of Bombay in the early wee hours of the morning. And all I knew from Jal was to come to Pune and go to, not the VT station, Dadar station. So what happened in those early morning hours, this guy and I were walking around. If we dared to stop, the Indians never sleep. There's always somebody up. And they would stand there and look at us. They'd form and they'd stand around us and look at us. And this went on, and I didn't know what their intentions were. Coming from New York, I figured, I had a nail file. That was what I was going to protect myself with. But anyway, this other fella, he went his way when we realized that his Baba and my Baba were not the same guys. I said, no, my Baba doesn't pull things out of his hair and doesn't do that stuff. So I eventually somehow got to Dadar station, and it was 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I go to the ticket counter and ask for a ticket to Pune, which they happily sell me. What I didn't know is that there was the Deccan Queen Express that got there in 3 hours, and there was the milk train to Pune, which took 7 hours. So guess which ticket I bought? So I go to the track, and I'm waiting for the train to come in, and again, I put my bag down, and I had a full beard going on, and I had the, sort of the hippie kind of clothes, which I came to realize it's totally irresistible for the Indians. They have to know what's going on. So I would just stand there, and they would gather around. They'd come up from the railroad tracks and get up on the platform and stand, and they'd just look. And some of them would smile, and others would just look, and really it was. So I pick up my bag and walk 20 feet, and they'd follow me. So this was getting a little nervy because I hadn't any sleep. And then I'm starting to walk again to get away from it, and from the other direction comes 2 women, 2 little short women. And of course in those days, whenever you went anywhere, you were supposed to wear a baba button. So as we get closer to each other, finally within 4 or 5 feet of each other, the one woman opens her arms. My immediate thought was, well, now here comes the girls of the night. The boys are back there waiting for me. Now the ladies of the evening are going to greet me. But the next thing she did is she said, Jai Baba. Well, I fell into this little woman. She was Pervis Kelkar, Sridhar's wife, who became, for years, my godmother in India. She would let me have it for all my sins. She's really one of my favorite people in the world. Anyway, she was bringing a servant there, and she got the servant on the milk train too. So she says, you go in with her, but you can't go in the compartment with her because she's a man and women compartment. But she'll let you know when to get off. So we get on the train and we get off. Finally in Pune, it's after 7 hours, if I remember right. Again, no sleep. And Jal had said, come to the Amir Hotel. Now, let me back up a little bit. I knew that the society folks were going to be there for the darshan. This is the 72 darshan, January 1972. So because of this ridiculous, unfounded rift between the 2 groups, I said, well, I'm not going to be there with those folks. So I planned to get there on February 1st, February 2nd, which I did. So I go to the Amir Hotel. I find out where that is, across from the railway station. I walk in. There is Jal. Now, I've never met Jal before, but he sees me walk in, and he knows there's only one person coming that looks like that. And he says, you must be Frank Parker. I'm Jal Dastur. Hey, Baba. And with him was Dara Dada Chanji, one of Anabas's younger brother. What a beautiful soul he was. He died very young, unfortunately. So I'm embracing them, and then I look around the smallish lobby, and the entire society for Avatar Meherabad is sitting there, along with herself, who was giving me the old Popeye eye. Check out who I was. Herself, for those who don't know, was Anna Rosa, who took over the society after Harry passed away. And all this was happening in sort of a microsecond in my mind, and then the next thing that happened is this tall, lanky fellow walks down the stairs, enters into the lobby, and Giles says, "Frank, I want you to meet Pete Townsend." So I said, "Pete Townsend." So I reached out to shake his hand and come out with one of the best lines I ever had in my life after 48 hours of no sleep. "Gee, Pete, I love Tommy. Doofus." Anyway, what else could I say? So anyway, Giles says, "You go next door to the Gulmar Hotel, get a room, and we'll be back. We'll be up there to see you later. Take rest." So I go, and eventually they come. I don't know what time it was. It was some good of a half a day or more later. And they were exhausted. Apparently, shepherding and chaperoning the society through all the different things, they were exhausted. But I fell in love with Jal at that moment because Jal walked in and he had his little, he had his little to-go case with him. You open it up, you got the little shiny glasses and little bottles of elixir. And so we sat there and we had a good old time. And then the next day, the society wanted to go over to Baba's house, and somehow I was dragged along into that. I don't know, just went over there. So I went to Baba's house about 2 times. But the second day, I came into the Emir Hotel, and there was a fellow sitting there, big guy, ruddy face. In fact, very apropos, because his name was Harold Rudd. And he's sitting there, and he sees me walking. I've got the Baba button. "Come here and sit down." And I said, "Okay." I sit down, and he's all in a real state. "You've got to take me back to Baba's house. Baba's pushed me away. I've got to get back." He was in a real turmoil, or something to do with Gina Driel and something he was involved with at some point. So anyway, without going into all those details, he was upset enough to the point I said, "Okay, I'll take you back to Baba's house." And we go back to Baba's house. Knock on the door. Jalarani opens the door. And the first thing I said to Giles, "Jal, I don't have any more razors or cigarettes to give you, but this fellow wants a cigarette." So he brushed past us. He pushed us aside, and he ran into the courtyard. And you know, there was that well in Baba house, and you make a left and you go to Baba's room where the stone is on the floor. And he laid himself out prone and started crying and wailing and asking for forgiveness. And Giles says, "You come with me." And we went to his room and sat down. And he was really into him. And I felt so sorry for the guy. But, and I didn't know who he was. I mean, I think I knew his wife. I had met her from the Jersey group. You knew the Reds, didn't you? But he was, you know, it was just a moment he was having, I guess. But anyway, the next thing, I met another character that was to play a part in my life by the name of John Florence. We grew up about 10 miles from each other in the streets of Queens. And he was in Astoria, and I lived next door to Archie Bunker, which explains a lot. And so we sort of met each other. We were both going to Meherabad, of course. So I forget how we got there, a bus or maybe a paper taxi. Somehow we got there. And we met Monty. We went to the trust office, and Monty and Harris, they all came out, and we stood there, and they greeted us all and asked us where we were from, all that kind of stuff. And then John, having more money than me and being more fussy than me, he went off to stay at Villa Villa, which was sort of like staying in the Taj Mahal, the Colaba section of Bombay, at that time in 1972. I went over and stayed in Daulat, the infamous Daulat, which was across the street from the canteen, past the cantina, just across the street. And you walk in there, and they had several little like hotel room type things. $1 a day. You got 3 meals, you got the room, and you got a mouse. Free of charge, everybody got a mouse. Came in the window at night and ate whatever you left your graham cracker cookies or something. And they had an old Muslim guy named Lakshman Dada. He was the cook. And Lakshman's habit was to come out in the morning and how do they say in India, attended a call to nature, but it's got to be the worst Indian bathroom I have ever been in, and I've been in a few. And he would come out of there, and he'd walk right past the sink, the washing the hand sink, and go right in, and we'd be out there yelling, Lakshman Dada, Ekti, Ekchai, and he didn't stop the washing. So it was the one, I only say this because we were all sick all the time. And Adi K. Arani was over there, trust me, he used to make house calls to the Dalai with his homeopathic stuff. And we had quite a crowd there. Jerry Watson, who was sort of like a hermit. He had a bike, and he'd get up every morning, and before anybody would see him, he would bicycle out to Meherabad and stay there all day long. Denny Moore, myself, Brad Gunn, Bevan. So now that was Bevan Dawes in those days. And there were a couple of others, and very few girls at that time. And of course, when we were at our age, when we were in India for 3 months, it got a little testy over there. So few girls, that Indian girls, you could barely see the toes. So the hormones were raging, but we just sort of ignored it and pushed through. It was what Baba loved us. So this is January. And for the next several weeks, we would go to Meherabad, we would go to Meherabad, and stay out there. I think it was at that time 5 days a week we would go, 5 or 6, and stay out there all day long. And there came a point which we all looked forward to going out to Meherabad. You would get 4 days in Meherabad. You go out on a Monday and come back on Friday after lunch, I think. And we stayed in the original whitewash huts where the Mandali stayed. It was one hut was for the women, one hut was for the men. They had maybe 4 or 5 beds, and they had built one or two brick urinals, meaning basically an outhouse, hole in the ground type of thing, with the pans underneath, and the servants would come and empty. So we stayed there for 4 days, and that was our Meherabad experience. And we were there with Padre, which was wonderful. I mean, Padre, if you want to know how to be a man, you just hang around with Padre for a while. You realize how much of a man you weren't. I mean, he was. And then, of course, Mansari up on the hill. And the first time I met Mansari, she takes me to a room. She gives me a cup of tea, of course. And she says to me, "Do you take LSD, Frank?" I said, "Yeah, I have." She says, "So do I." And I was so shocked. I said, "Mansari, you take LSD?" She says, love sweet divine. Yeah, love sweet is divine.
Love supreme divine.
Love supreme divine. That's it, thank you. And so, life became days at Meherabad rather, and with Padre, and Sidhu was back there taking care of Muhammad the Must, who I always gave a generous walk around to, because I had heard about Must, and I didn't want him doing anything. I didn't want to disturb him at all. And Erica was there, and Heather, and it were just wonderful times to live like that. And when the PC got built and opened up, the first time I walked in the door in 1980, I said, "Oh, this is too much." It was too much, because you really felt like you lived like they lived, and it was great. Anyway, to get back to what was going on in Naga, Baba's birthday was coming up, and some of them got together. There was a fellow named Jeff Milet there who was a great musician and singer. He was in Godspell on Off-Broadway. And Charlie Manor and Bobby Street was there. You can remember Bobby Street being quiet as a church mouse. He had long curly hair down to his waist. We were quite a crowd, but there were enough people there, and then Mandali said, "You must do something for Baba's birthday." So they got together and they started thinking about what to do, put on a play. They decided on the Tales of Narnia, Aslan the Lion. If I didn't mispronounce that. So they started writing dialogue and writing songs. Jeff was doing most of that and taking parts, and they came to me and said, "Okay, you're going to be this," and then the next day they say, "No, you can be a tree." No, and someone was making costumes. Well, my ego was just too much for this kind of thing. I was never an artsy guy, kind of guy, so I said, hey, listen, just count me out of this thing. And so, and I went over and I watched a couple of the rehearsals, and I said, oh, they're gonna embarrass themselves. Like, this is terrible, just terrible. And anyway, my ego got all behind that. I was superior. I was not gonna participate. I was not gonna make a fool of myself. So, the birthday comes, and we all go out to the Samadhi. And I don't know how it happened to this day, but the women went in, Mara, of course, with the roses, and the women, all the women, there were quite a few. And somehow, somebody reached them, one of the women reached out, I was standing right outside the door, and there weren't many of us there at that time, and pulled me into the Samadhi. So there I am with all the women. And that was the moment Papa decided to really let me know who he was. These kinds of things cannot be explained. Well, I'll say it was the darshan experience. If you've had it, you know what it is. But I was reduced to ashes, and I left the Samadhi, and went out back in the fields and sat down, and I remember, aside from the tears and the sobbing, such a feeling of unworthiness to have this experience. And I was really literally shocked into silence. The whole way back, I come out in the bus, I think, the whole way back, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I got back to the Dalit, I went into the room. I didn't want to see anybody, and I wrote a poem about the day experience. I just had to do something, and that's how it came out. And I'm not a poet or anything like that. So, the next thing that happened is they loaded all the Westerners into these bullock carts, decorated as only the Indians can do, like the trucks you see. They had all these different things on them, pictures of Baba. And they loaded us on the back of these bullock carts and took us all through Naga. And the Indians love a show, so they were all out in the streets. And the women Mondley at some point Mayor and the women Mondley were in one of the buildings at the top, and they waved to us. Now, this is a big thing, because Mayor had not been out in public. So for her to be out there, that was a big deal. And we went through there, and I was sitting with my feet hanging off the back of the cart, and 2 or 3 times people would run out of the crowd, usually older men, and touch my feet. Well, I said, oh boy, they just got their sanskaras now. So anyway, I talked to Monty about that later. I said, no, that's their way of paying respect, because you're here for God, so don't worry about it. So that was good to know. So then after that was over, it was such a full day, and the play was going to go on. And we went to the play, and it started, and the music. Someone, I think Charlie Mann, had painted this huge portrait of a big-headed lion, which was the character in the Tales of Narnia. And the music went on, the singing, the dialogue, the thing, and I sat there, stunned how good this was. What I saw was terrible. This was out of this world. I mean, there's a bunch of kids, with the exception of Jeff Milet, none of them really had any experience. So the thing went on, and the Montley was overjoyed and so happy, because they put this all together in the space of about 10 days or 2 weeks the most. The costumes, everything. And there's me, bump on the lawn, didn't do anything. So I took out the poem. I had brought the poem with me. And just as they were about to break up, I had somewhere I found within me the nerve to say, look at my ears. And she said, oh, Frank, do you want to say something? So I read the poem, and I barely got through it, because it was still that day. And I remember at the end looking up and seeing Mara with this. So that was yet another one of his experiences. And, the other thing about those times in Naga was, I just wanted to mention one of the things, Adi K, what a role model he could be. What a sense of humor, but he was like a lion, Adi. And he would give talks once a week over in the trust, in the Naga Baba Center, in the trust compound. And we would go over there, and he was so delightful. I mean, he would give me a talk about whatever the subject was be, and he had Frida Kanz, he had this poetry, the way he moved his hands, and he would recite Persian poetry, and then he translated to English for us. One of the best memories I have that I still keep with me of that time was when he was talking about God Speaks, and he started to say this thing, and I wrote it down. I want to make sure I get it right because it made such sense to me. He said, if you want to understand God Speaks, understand it like this. God is not man. God is not God. He is the avatar who comes to bring God down to man and man up to God. Simple. And I never forgot that. Because that sort of tells the whole story. I mean, not of all of God Speaks, but what the purpose of the avatar was. It was moments like that. And there were so many of us, there were so few of us there, so few Westerners. When we would go to Meherabad, there was 10, 15 Mandali around with no one to talk to. I mean, people like, everybody knew, of course, Erich and Mani, but there was Oliver, there was Rano, Anavas, Nariman, so many others, Francis. I was so intimidated by Francis's reputation. I sat and talked to him for a little bit, but I didn't know he was going to give me one on the side of the head for being a jerk, which I was at the time. So those were wonderful days. I mean, with all those Mandali around, the men for the men, the women for the women, and of course we went around to the porch. And this is when Mary had first come out. After she came out for 69 darshan, but this is now February '72. Not a whole lot of Westerners had come, so she came out on the porch, and we all went there and we greeted her, and like this, and then we sort of a few men sat on the steps, not even on the same level, and I would look up as the purest soul in all the universe, and you're sitting at her feet. Get out of here! I mean, it just didn't compute with me what that was. And of course, she was so beautiful with her expressions in her face, and her love for Baba was. And at one point, she would take people into Baba's room. So she takes John Florence and I believe, John Florence and I into Baba's room, and she's standing in front of us, and she's pointing to this in the voice. I'm going to try to imitate the voice. You know how she spoke. She said, "That's Baba's photo. And this is beautiful Baba's bed, and this is his hair, and I used to cut it." And she's saying all these little intimate things, and as she's saying this, the tears coming down, 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 falling onto her blouse. And wow, you talk about a moment. The pure, and right behind her head, she was staying with, and right behind her head was the tree. And she turned around and pointed at this, what Baba did. It was a tree with his face in it. So we had those moments like that. And then I had always had a desire to travel because I was a Sagittarius, but I was so torn and conflicted because of the rule that if you come to India, you go right home. Well, I wasn't ready to go home. I had been there 2 months. So Brad Gunn and I decided we were going to go on a little trip up northern India. So I went to Erich and I told him. He said, if you want to go, go. 3 times I went to Erich in 3 days. And finally, the last time he said, "You could have been back already. Why do you keep asking me this question?" So I took that as permission. So Brad and I did leave the next day, I think. We left Naga, got on a bus, and we went up to not the Alorca, the Ajanta caves, which are further away than the Laura, and they're all Buddhist. So we went up there, and I forget when we got there. It was in the afternoon at some point. We went around, looked at some of the caves. I have a picture of me in one of the caves with the big Buddha behind me, and I'm sitting in on the ground in the lotus position, and I got hair down to here. It was still the hair down to here days. And at some point it got too hot in the afternoon, so we were staying at the guest house, we had taken rooms. So we go to the guest house to take some rest. And I lay down in bed and I noticed the fan's not working. And it was hot. So I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. So I get up, I look out in the hall, fans are all working. Walk to the edge of the stairs, look down, and the fan in the lobby's working. So I remember muttering several expletive deleters as I walked down the stairs. And somehow, don't ask me how, it was just meant to be, my foot went out from underneath me and I fell. And I broke my arm. Now this is the first day out of Meherabad. So I'm sitting there, and I know the arm is broken. I'm holding it like this. I'm in, shock and pain as we would have with such a thing. And the Indian kids are all standing down looking at me, not knowing what to do. And I motioned to one of them, get my friend. So one of them started the stairs to do that. At that very moment, into the lobby walks a man, a woman, and a child. And the man and the woman had just arrived there. They came from Delhi. And the woman sees the commotion and sees me sitting on the stairs like this in pain. And she comes right up to me and says, "What happened?" I said, "I think I broke my arm." And she says, "Well, let me see, I'm a doctor." So she looks, she says, "Yes, your arm is kind of fractured, we have to get you to a hospital." So she started issuing orders in Hindi, which I was impressed with. And they got bed sheets, they wrapped me up and put a sling like this. And by this time, Brad came out of the room and he gathered up our stuff. This couple was from, I want to say, the Hungarian embassy in Delhi. And at that time, Hungary was still under communism. Not that that mattered at that moment, I could care less. But they took me and they put me in their car and they drove me back. It had to be 40, 50 miles. The nearest city was Jalgaon, and they had to look for a doctor. And I remember Brad, he had a amoebic dysentery. I had a broken arm. We're sitting in the back, and we're on Indian roads, and Brad's trying to put his 95 pounds of weight on me to hold me down, because every time, even with and she took out a codeine. I was sitting on the stairs. She had taken a codeine. So we pulled into Jalgaon. Just as we pull up, they ask directions, and they pull up to this clinic. And just as they pull up, the doctor's coming out to lock up for the night. And they explained the situation, and he said, "Follow him." And he gets on a scooter, and he goes somewhere, and they go somewhere, and wind up at his other clinic. And they take me inside, and this woman and Brad and the husband and woman and the child and Brad disappear. There's nothing for them to do. So now I'm in the hospital, and they take me in and lay me down on the table, take an x-ray. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" Because I had visions, he's going to call the brother-in-law, and they're going to do one of these. And the nurse comes over, and she's got a hypodermic, and they're doing, they do. And I said, wait a second. I sat up. I said, "What is that?" "Sodium pentothal." I said, "You don't have sodium pentothal. This is India. You don't have sodium pentothal. You want your arm fixed or not?" And he pushed me down in the arm with the sodium pentothal, 10-9-8-7 out. Woke up the next morning, arm is fixed, complete plaster Paris cast up to here, ace bandage, the whole 9 yards, just like you get in an American hospital. And he charged me $50, which at that time was not much more than I had. So then Brad said, "Well, I guess you want to go back." I said, what's going to happen? You've got dysentery, I've got a broken arm, let's just keep going. So we traveled on for another couple of weeks up through Rajasthan and different places like that. And we were so broken when we came back, we were eating bananas. And we managed to get back to Jalgaon. I went back to this doctor and I said, "Could I borrow that 50? And he gave it to me. And when I told him, I sent it back, which I did. And we managed to get back to Meherabad, to Ahmednagar. And I wired John Elliott and said, wire me $50 to give to this guy." So, what that did, the whole purpose of that story is how he takes care of us. I mean, we were in the middle of nowhere in the Ajanta Caves, and it's 1972, it's not today. And suddenly, I no sooner get hurt than in comes a doctor with codeine tablets and a car. I mean, so that's another, there was these little steps in my evolution with Bob of how he, first intellectually who he was, and then with the darshan and these other things, and then this, So I guess I could say, by the time I left India in '72, I was about, I had had these little things and gone through it. So that's pretty much the story of how I came to Baba and what happened on the trip. And then I did go back to India every 2 or 3 years when I felt the batteries needed recharging. And there was, weeks that I spent with the Mandali, but I don't recall certain things like that happen. But to be around them, just to be around them, to watch them, to see how they reacted. And then in 1986, I went over there for 3 months. I had met my current wife, Josephine, and I needed 3 months to get over this with her. We had a tumultuous courtship, but it was all good, and I knew I was supposed to marry her. Maybe that's what I was resisting. So I went to India for 3 months, and I worked with Balnatu. He gave me a typewriter, an old Remington typewriter with the carbon paper, and I would pound out Baba stories that people had either written or with a tape. And that's how I started all that years ago with him. So those 3 months were important. And one thing happened during that time, I want to tell you, was we were in his room working. We had a regular schedule when I would go out and work with him. And one day I noticed that the Mandali were not on the porch. It was the day that they go out, once a month they go out to the Samadhi, and they put flowers down, and it was that day. So I didn't pay any attention to it, and then later on in the afternoon, after lunch, we're working, and I happened to look out his window, and then, again, there's no one on the porch. So I said to Bal, I said, what happened to the women? Is something wrong? The women are not back from yet. It's unusual for women not to come right back. And he said, oh, I didn't notice, because we were here working, and I just didn't notice they weren't there. And then he proceeds to tell me a story. Now, Balnatu was a teacher. That was his profession. And with me, he was every bit a teacher. And he said, one day I was in here working on something for Baba, and outside my room, Eraj and Pendu and some other man, they were having a conversation. And I was concentrating on my work for Baba, and suddenly I hear this comes to my ear. I say, oh, somebody's having a conversation about such and such. So I get up and I go out. And I joined the conversation. And he said, and I completely ignored what Baba wanted me to do. I was doing this, but I went out there to get involved in something I had no reason to be involved with. And, it was nothing about me or for me. He was making the point ever so subtly, but not so subtly. And then he said, we're here working. And, the women are here or not here. And the way he brought that home to me, how much I know in my life do we involve ourselves in things in which we have no reason to be there, and usually with no good result. It's one of the things that the Mandali would do that you would just pick up on. So, skipping all the way ahead, let me just see if there's anything I missed out. We went to live in India. I always wanted to live there. I asked Baba many times when I went there to please bring me here after I retire to work and be of service. And so, I guess he got annoyed with me asking so many times. Because my experience in the Samadhi would be, I'd walk in, I'd sit down, I'd just get comfortable, and I'd hear this voice say, I'm busy with him. So I was dismissed. And I guess he just got annoyed with me asking so many times. So he made it possible. These condos are being built by James Cox and his partner. It just all worked out. We sold our house in Chapel Hill. We moved to India. That's the short part of it. And my intention was to work with Balnatu like I had in '86. But when I got there, things had changed. Erica and Amber were there working with him, doing the things that I wanted to do the work. And they were two lovely gals. And after that many years with Barbara, I had finally learned a few things. And in this particular case, it was obvious I shouldn't try to push myself into this relationship that they had. What does Jim Croce say? Don't grab Superman's cape, don't spit in the wind, and Lord knows, don't mess with Jim. Was the situation. I learned, I realized I shouldn't. But what happened was we worked it out, so a lot of the things they couldn't get to or didn't want to do, they gave to me. And so I did that from the condo, from our house. So it worked out very well. And Bob was getting frailer and frailer. He always had delicate health, and they were needed to take care of him. So after we were there a few months and finally got settled into the condo, I got a call from Heather one day, and she said, Mary wants to see you. Would like to see you. Can you go out? So to Meherabad, I said, sure, I can go. So I went out, and I meet Mary, and she said, what a con artist she was. She says, you can't even come into my mind lately, Frank. She said, we have a set of architectural plans to build an archive building here at Meherabad. Now, the word they call is archive building, but it was nothing like the one in Meherabad. That's an archive building. This was sort of along the same lines, but not as elaborate. And she said, would you be willing to come out to Meherabad and oversee the project? Now, oversee means they had an Indian builder, guy who built the NPR, as a matter of fact, spoke English, wonderful guy, and his foreman, again, totally competent. And then there was, but they like to have Westerners there to sort of watch things. And so I said, well, let me think about it. So I went away, and a couple weeks later, I kept tossing around my door. I really want to go 22 miles one way every day. And so finally the phone rings again. It's Heather. She says, Mary wants to tell her. So I went back out, and I said, I met her. I said, okay, I'll do it under these conditions. I'm not going to come out every day. I will be here when I have to be here, absolutely. And I'll, work closely with the the builder. Do a couple of other things. We agreed to do it, and I started the work. And the first day I went there, I reported to work, and the foundation was going to be dug. And they don't have heavy equipment over there as a rule. But I wasn't prepared for this. I went there, and there was, I'd say, a middle-aged Indian man in his 50s and his wife, both of them no taller than 5'3", 2 mules and a kid. And the guy had one of those, like it looks like a hoe. That's their shovel. So he's digging the perimeters of the foundation. She's got her job was he puts it on the gamella on the ground, the round pan they call it a gamella. He fills the dirt in there. She picks it up, puts it on her head. The kid comes and takes. She walks over to the donkeys, and the donkeys had sacks over their back. And the young kid would open up the sack. She'd dump the dirt into the sack. And there were 2 donkeys and 4 sacks. And this would happen when the sacks were filled. The kid would just go like that, and the donkeys would walk 20 feet away to the designated spot and do this, and dump the dirt. It's the most amazing thing I ever saw. But I also said, my God, I'm going to be here the rest of my life. They're going to bury me here. They're going to give me a spot in Mayor's Garden. This is going to go on forever. Because it was quite a complex building. It was designed by someone who became a good friend of mine, Hasan Selçuk from Turkey. He was the architect. But it had columns. It had, I think, 8 or 10 columns in the building, plus the walls. And anyway, the work started and proceeded, and I would go out pretty much every day in the beginning. And at some point, a few months down the road, after the building started to come out of the ground, I went out there once, and Falu came to me. Falu was sort of watching over me. I watched over what was going on, and I would take care of the when they put in a request for money, I would deal with stuff like that. I was a project manager, that's what I was. And the curious thing about that, when Mary asked me to do this, she had no idea what I did for a living. And what I did for a living in 20 years in the city of Durham, I was a project manager, construction manager. And to this day, I cannot read a blueprint very well. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, I have no degrees, but I know how to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and that's what a project manager does, you know. And that's what I wound up doing here. Baba knew what I could do, so what Meru didn't tell me, I told me she conned me a little. Well, I found out later on, I was the third person she asked. The other two had said no. So, anyway, I go around to the porch to see Go Hair, and she's sitting there on the porch all by herself. So I walk up and I kneel down, and she says, "Frank, you're doing such a good job for us with this archive building. Do you know that we have the plans for a clinic, the architectural plans?" I said, "Yeah, Paulu's shown them to me." And she puts her hand on my hand. She says, "Would you do the same thing with that building now? Does anyone say no to Go Here?" No. So I said, "Of course I will." So I go back and I said, "Tell Falu what happened." So he said, and I said, "Look, Falu, I know you have another set of plans for a staff quarter building to be built out by the new clinic." Which, by the way, is way out in the back. I don't know if people know this, but I think the present count, the Meherabad Trust owns about 160 acres. It's no longer the small 12 acres or 13 acres that it was. They bought a lot of land in the back over the years. So this is, as the crow flies from Meherabad, it's probably about a mile out there. It's quite a ways out. And that was because the Pimplegown people, it was closer for them to come there than it was to come to Meherabad. So we got that project started, and there was the architect for that was a woman in Bombay and Pune who I never met, but the sub-architect was Ted. And I had known Ted for years, and I knew Ted to be a very hard taskmaster. And when I went and lived there, I said, "I don't want to work for Ted because he's too volatile." So am I. But when Ted found out I was going to do, we sat down and we talked. He said, "Look, I will come out anytime you really need me, but I've got all this other stuff to do. So this is yours. But if you get stumped or you don't know what's going on, or you feel unsure, you call me and I will come out." So we worked together fine that way. And then the other building was designed by another architect in Bombay, and that was a staff quarter building, maybe 7 rooms with a kitchen and a common area. And so I started building those two at once because you could build a foundation here for the clinic, and then when that was ready, you moved them over to build the foundation for the new building, so they went up like that. So those buildings went up, and in 2.5 years, they were all built. And I had to take occasional get out of India because of the visa requirement. But the work went on, and finally they were all done. So the archive building is there, the Meher Clinic. If you've been out there, have you seen it? Yeah, it's quite nice. And the fellow who did all the landscaping, he's got the greenest thumb in the universe, that guy. And so that was my Meherabad days. And all it worked out, and Bobby used the talents such that I have. And then I was ready to retire. Now I should mention that we were the first ones to move into the Garden Terrace condos. And they were still being built. In fact, ours wasn't ready. We moved over there in March. James Cox said, "It'll be ready." It wasn't ready till June. So we lived in the upstairs of Hardeep and Deer's place down in the colony. And it had no air conditioning. It had one of those cooling machines that hadn't been cleaned in 40 years. We were really suffering. It was the summer, March, April, May. And we had they had a bar that didn't like us, so we didn't get our usual water supply every day. It was really hot. And at one point, Joe broke down crying, and I realized that the next thing was going to happen. I had to get her out of there, or she was going to go to the Yellow Pages and find an attorney. So I took her off to Mahabaleshwar, and and then to Pune, where she had air conditioning and television, and we only got one station at Vera's place, the BBC. How many times can you hear that BBC? Oh, God. So then we finally got into the condos, and we were the first ones in there. And the condos were being built by laborers that were imported from different places, and right in back of us, 20 yards in back, was all these rows of Indian huts. And they were living their lives back there. They were having babies, cooking food, dying. It was this whole incredible thing going on. And there were 24 units they were working on. So we lived with all this construction. And as they got done, because we were there, the other owners that bought the condos would write us and ask us different things, what to do, how to handle it. And, you know, I started to get involved trying to help them get settled in there in different ways, and so did Joe. So we sort of became the mama and the papa of the condos, which was not something I planned, but nevertheless it was important to do it. Because things over in India don't get done unless you've got someone watching, and that's just the way it is. And anyway, in the middle of all that, the NPR was going to open up. So I was talking to Ted Judson one day at his porch, and I said, how are things going at the building? Because he was the architect for that. And he said, oh, everything's fine, except the Indian manager we hired to be the superintendent of the building. He decided to take another job. So all I said was, well, you know, if there's any help you need, anything I can do to help you, let me know. And I remember him looking up with his hands like this. He said, you're the perfect one. I said, oh, what did I do now? And within 3 hours after that conversation, I got calls from Heather and Alan. Wonderful, you're going to be the superintendent of the NPR, which we never really wanted to do, but it seemed like this is what Baba wanted me to. So I became the superintendent of the NPR, the building superintendent. I was in charge of the lobbymen and the watchmen and the maintenance guys and all that stuff. And there were these, that was in Meherabad forever, there's been these fiefdoms. And the receptionists who were all Westerners, they had one fiefdom, and then there was, Alan had the kitchen, Dr. Ann had the medical, and then you had the receptionists, not the receptionists, the ones who check in, Pat and Irene and all that. That was another one. So you had all this stuff, and it went along fine. You know, the first few months there, I was the golden boy. The place opened up on time. Whatever little problems there might have been, were fixed immediately, and I was walking on water. I couldn't do no wrong. Of course, I knew that would not last long. There was a lot of internal, what they call in India, kick between the different factions. The housekeeping department, and we would have meetings, and those were always fun. Always fun to have the meetings. And anyway, I did that for a year and a half, and then finally I decided that I had had enough. But Joe and I had gone away, and when I came back, there was something going on. I wrote a very nice letter to Heather, and I said, you know, I think that I've done my part, and it's up and running. You know how it works. And so I resigned, and then after I resigned, Jal was not happy, Shrita was not happy with me, and at some point Jal said, do you have to go in and explain this to Bauji? I said, why? Bauji didn't hire me. But it was protocol. So I went in, at some point I went in and talked to Bauji, and he said, why are you doing this? And I told him. And he said, he went on, he started telling stories about his days with Bob and how Bob would make this difficulties, presenting these situations. And I listened very respectfully and said, Bauji, I know what you're saying. I just don't want to do it anymore. You know, which is, what can we do to change your mind? I said, and I told him what he could do, which was dismiss one of the more cantankerous characters. And I knew he couldn't do it, he wouldn't do it. So I said, if you do that, I'll stay, but if you don't, I'm not gonna go in every day and go through this. So Anyway, that was the end of the NPR days. And then, by that time, the condos had, a lot of the owners had come and they had gotten their condos up and furnished and everything was running along. And then suddenly it became apparent, for reasons I don't have to go into, that our time there was coming to an end. And of course, I went to the Samadhi and talked to Bob about it. And Jo wanted to go back. She had did 10 years there, and this was amazing. She adapted India so well. She handled the whole culture thing so well. In the beginning, she'd get in a car and drive to Pune by herself to shop and spend overnight and come back. But it just became time. Then she said she wanted to go back, so we made arrangements to come back. And the way it was going to work, I was going to stay in India 6 months a year, and she was going to just live here in Florida with her brother. So we came back here, we went to Florida, we found a place. Baba fixed the whole thing up. We had left, we had sold everything, we had nothing. We came back, within 2 weeks we had a completely furnished home and a car, a Florida driver's license, everything we need, like we never left. He just made it so easy for us. And then I went back to India, and it became apparent this was not going to work, because Baba put me into this strange state of consciousness where I missed Jo so much. I would walk around, look at our wedding picture, and look at the pictures, and it was incredible. I mean, I fell in love with this woman all over again. And this is after 20-something years of marriage. And I realized what was going on. It was him. And it was his way. When I found what it came down to, if you're going to be married, be married. You're not going to do this 6 months here, 6 months there. So we sold the condo, and that was the end of that. And I don't know if I'll ever. I'd like to go back one more time. I'd like to go back and bow down one more time. I'd like to see Jal and Sridhar and some of my friends over there. But we shall see. That's in his hands. But to sum it all up, it's been one hell of a journey, and it ain't over yet. J. Bob.
Yeah.
There was one more story about Kitty that I should include. Because of my good friendship with Lois Brager, who worked for Kitty, I got invited to Aruba for lunch with Kitty and Elizabeth. And I approached this with some trepidation because Elizabeth was, well, she was Elizabeth, and if you were doing something wrong in the kitchen, the station wagon would show up. And I knew this about Elizabeth, and I never had spent any time with her really. So we had this wonderful lunch in Aruba, and Elizabeth was beyond delightful. There was no talks of Baba really, but and her and Kitty, it was fascinating to be with them. They just knew so much and had so much interest in different things that were going on in the world and all that stuff. It wasn't in any way an interview like, who are you and what do you, what did you find out about Baba? None of that. It was just so very natural. And I'm always indebted to Lois for that, because that's the only time I ever spent with them like that. And since then I've been writing, typing up other people's experiences, Tom's and Marshall Hayes, and they have so many great stories about these two giants of God, Kitty and Elizabeth. So anyway, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that I did get that rare gift and blessing to have lunch with them. So,
Can I ask you how would you describe how you relate to Baba now? How is he in your life right now?
Well, I'd like to say he's my constant companion, but I'm not very good at keeping him that way. He is my Lord, my master, my lover, beloved, I should say, not lover. I can't imagine my life without him. I can't. I'm following in his footsteps, literally. I've been to so many places in the world. In fact, I had that down, I didn't say it. Beside India, from the pyramids of Egypt to Portofino to Assisi to Sri Lanka. I've been so many places where he went, and saw so much of the world. And all that's because of him, and because, excuse me, a lot of times in the 70s and 80s, you were allowed, when you flew over to India, you were allowed to get off the plane, go play around in Europe or wherever you were, and come back on a plane. Now you can't do that anymore. So I would take advantage of those opportunities to go to England or to Paris or wherever, and saw a part of the world. And when we were living in India, because we had to get out every 6 months, the visa made us get out, we went off to Turkey, we went to Australia 3 times, we went to all over Southeast Asia. If you would have told me in 1972 that I was going to wind up in Hanoi, I mean, not that Baba was there, but I did. It's just been such a fabulous journey with him. I mean, he's made my life wonderful. It's just full of blessings. And they say Sagittarians, a couple of astrologers have done my chart. And apparently I have something called intersecting grand trines, 3 of them. Which means, in astrological terms, you don't have to do anything in this life. You can just cruise down the river, which is your downfall if you allow that to happen. But I have been very lucky, I mean, in many, many ways. And always when I've run into a difficult problem, or some turning point in my life, somebody appeared who I never expected and reached out a hand to help me. And I think Bob was always behind that. You know, it's happened several times in my life where, you know, I had taken a wrong turn and I was about to get in trouble for it, and somebody reached out and said, come here, and took care of it. So I've been very fortunate, but most fortunate of all because of Bob. Like I said, without him, I can't imagine. I used to have that thought, well, what happened if I woke up one day and saw that Baba was in my life? I wouldn't want to live another second, you know, because he's been such a part of my life. I am not, I have never been one of those devotional, one of these, it's not my nature, but I love him the same, you know, and he is who he is. And I am his and he is mine. And that's the best way I can say it. Dear Baba.